Bullies shaved a black girl's head at school, not knowing she was the new mayor's daughter. They thought she was just another quiet girl. Easy to ignore. Easy to humiliate. But what these bullies didn't realize is that the girl they targeted was more powerful than they could ever imagine. Not because of who her mother was, but because of who she was. This story isn't just about cruelty, it's about what happens when the underestimated rise, when silence turns into strength, and when the most painful moments spark a movement. What started in a bathroom became a wake-up call for an entire city. Stay with us, because this is one story you won't forget. What if the bullies at school picked the wrong girl? A quiet, seemingly fragile student who carried a connection powerful enough to change everything. This story follows Jasmine Reed, a new transfer student who kept to herself, soft-spoken and reserved, quickly becoming the target of the most popular and ruthless group in school. They thought she was easy prey, just another silent victim. But what they didn't know is that Jasmine Reed is far from ordinary. She's the daughter of Atlanta's newly elected mayor, and her silence was only the surface. Stay with us until the end, because what begins with cruelty and arrogance ends with a reckoning that will force an entire city to look itself in the mirror. It was just after 7:30 a.m. on a crisp September morning when Jasmine Reed stepped off the yellow school bus in front of Millbrook High. The sun was still rubbing the sleep from its eyes over the Georgia pines, and the dew on the football field shimmered like silver thread. The school building loomed brick and proud, built in the 1960s and barely updated since. Its hallways still smelled faintly of pine scent cleaner and teenage sweat. Jasmine Reed walked with quiet purpose. She wasn't loud, not the kind of girl who drew attention, but there was something about her. The way she carried her books tight to her chest, the careful way she tied her shoes, the exactness in how she wore her navy sweater over her white button-down shirt. That said, she was here to do more than just blend in. Millbrook wasn't her first school. It was her third in 5 years. Her mother, Imani Reed, had been moving up the political ladder faster than anyone expected. From city councilwoman in Savannah to now just 2 weeks into her term, mayor of Atlanta and the first black woman to hold the office. But Jasmine Reed didn't tell people that she didn't wear privilege like a badge. She wore it like a scar, one she didn't ask for and didn't flaunt. In the cafeteria that morning, she sat alone as usual, a tangerine peeled neatly on her tray, fingers quietly reading a paperback copy of Their Eyes Were Watching God. A group of girls passed her table, Sienna Blake, Tessa Monroe, and Harley Quinnell, the kind of girls who always had polished nails and parents on the school board. They snickered. Still playing librarian, huh? Sienna Blake tossed her ponytail. Jasmine Reed didn't look up. Still failing civics, huh? The table behind them cracked with soft laughter, quickly stifled. Harley Quinnell leaned over. You're not funny. You're just weird. That was how it always started. Words. But it never ended with words. By third period, rumors had started. Someone said Jasmine Reed had a secret. Someone said she'd gotten caught stealing. Someone said her mom bought her way into school. None of it was true, but that wasn't the point. In the girls' locker room after gym, the whispers got closer. Clothes went missing. Her sneakers were thrown in the trash. No teacher said anything. And then it happened. Friday, September 29th, the day before homecoming. The halls buzzed with posters and pep rallies. Nia, still trying to keep her head down, went to the library during lunch, but they found her before fifth period near the science wing where the cameras didn't work and the teachers rarely walked. Come with us, Harley Quinnell said, flanked by Sienna Blake and Tessa Monroe. I'm late for class, Jasmine Reed replied, voice calm. No, you're right on time, Sienna Blake said. They pushed her into the second-floor bathroom, the one nobody used because the fan was broken and the light flickered. The door slammed shut. The echo lingered longer than it should have. They cornered her, and Jasmine Reed for the first time felt it, not fear exactly, but something colder, like humiliation waiting in the wings. Sienna Blake pulled out her phone. Maddie unzipped her bag and produced a pair of electric clippers, battery-powered, the kind used for buzz cuts. What are you doing? Jasmine Reed asked, backing against the wall. Harley Quinnell sneered, fixing that rat's nest on your head. No one wants to see that black girl magic. The words stung, but not because they were new. Jasmine Reed had heard them before. From neighbors, from classmates, from television talking heads, but never with this much venom. Tessa Monroe turned on the clippers. The buzzing filled the room louder than it should have been. Jasmine Reed could have screamed, could have fought. But she didn't. She stood still, back straight, eyes steady, and as the first lock of her thick, beautiful coils fell to the tile, she said only one thing. "You'll regret this." They laughed. The video recorded. They walked out before the bell rang, leaving her alone in a silence so loud it rang in her ears. But they didn't know. They didn't know she had gone to school that morning with a letter in her backpack, one her mother had written telling the school she'd be attending the next PTA meeting in person. They didn't know her mother was not just a public servant, but the most powerful elected official in Atlanta. They didn't know that Jasmine Reed hadn't cried in that bathroom, not because she wasn't hurt, but because she was already planning what came next. By that evening, the video had made it to TikTok and then Instagram and then Facebook and then the local news. The mayor's office was flooded with calls. Imani Reed watched the footage in silence from her laptop, eyes hard, jaw tight. Her assistant whispered, "We can call the board quietly. 624, handle this behind doors." But Imani Reed stood up and said, "No, we're not hiding this. Not this time." By Monday morning, the story had hit national media. Headlines screamed, "Mayor's daughter assaulted at school. Georgia high school under fire for racial attack." Where were the adults at Millbrook and Nia? Jasmine Reed walked into school with her head shaved clean. No scarf, no wig. She wore a gray hoodie with a single line across the front. "Still here." She didn't smile, didn't flinch, just walked to her locker as if nothing had happened. But everything had changed. Teachers whispered, students stared. A few averted their eyes, others offered nods, some silent, some solemn. And in the principal's office, Superintendent Dr. Evelyn Carrington was waiting, nervously adjusting her pearls as Mayor Imani Reed entered the room without knocking. "Madam Mayor," Ellison began. "I'm not here for pleasantries," Mia said. "I'm here for answers and action." Ma's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. It carried the weight of every mother who's ever had to protect her child from a system that claimed to care. Imani Reed sat across from the superintendent with the kind of calm that made people shift in their seats. Her gaze was unwavering, not angry in the way that flared and burned out, but deeper, controlled, focused, and unmistakably maternal. "You have a problem," she said simply. Ellison tried to respond, but Imani Reed lifted a hand. "This school failed my daughter. Not once, but over days, maybe weeks. Her shoes in the trash, slurs in the hallways, teachers who looked the other way, and then a bathroom floor littered with pieces of her identity." The silence was sharp. The school counselor, seated beside the principal, cleared her throat and offered, "We're conducting an internal investigation." "That won't be enough," Imani Reed replied. "Because this isn't just about Nia. It's about what you've allowed, what your silence enabled." Downstairs, the halls buzzed with an unfamiliar tension. Jasmine Reed sat in her home room, staring out the window, ignoring the soft gasps and sideways glances that followed her shaved head. The stares didn't sting like they used to. Now they felt small, like the last flickers of a fire that didn't have any more wood. She knew something was shifting. And though part of her wanted to retreat, a louder part whispered, "Stay." That afternoon, without notice, the mayor returned, this time to the school auditorium where the PTA was holding its first public forum of the semester. News vans dotted the street outside. Folding chairs filled fast. Parents, teachers, local activists. Jasmine Reed stayed home, but she watched from her mother's office, feet tucked under her, lips pressed into a thin line. On stage, Imani Reed stood tall in a navy pants suit, no podium in front of her, just the space between her and the crowd. Some of you know me as Mayor Thompson, others as Imani Reed from East Point, daughter of a union nurse and a postman who never missed church. But tonight, I'm not speaking as an official. I'm speaking as a mother. The crowd quieted. A mother whose daughter was violated in a place that was supposed to protect her. She paused. "Let that hang. I've seen the footage. I've read the complaints swept under the rug. I've listened to recordings where my daughter was laughed at in the hallway. And I'm here to tell you, we will no longer tolerate a culture where silence is mistaken for safety." The words landed hard. Some nodded. Some looked away, but no one dared interrupt. "I'm instituting an immediate review of school disciplinary procedures, implicit bias training for all staff, and I will personally oversee the reinstatement of a restorative justice board that includes parents, students, and independent observers. A murmur rippled across the room. This wasn't a suggestion. It was policy effective immediately. That weekend, the city shifted. Letters poured into the mayor's office. Some handwritten in shaky cursive. Others typed with bold fonts and underlined outrage. Black mothers from Stone Mountain. White veterans from Decatur. Teachers who had quietly resigned over what they saw but couldn't stop. The video didn't just show a girl getting her head shaved. It revealed a system trimmed too neatly around appearances, one that didn't know how to hold space for girls like Nia, brown, brilliant, and unwilling to shrink. On Monday, Jasmine Reed returned to school again with no wig. She wore a soft green sweater and jeans. At her locker, she found a sticky note. "You're brave." Then another, "I'm sorry I didn't speak up." And another, "You're not alone." By lunchtime, her table wasn't empty anymore. For students sat with her quietly, respectfully, not to ask questions, but simply to be there. Harley Quinnell, Tessa Monroe, and Sienna Blake were suspended pending investigation. Their parents tried to downplay the incident, citing kids being kids and cultural misunderstandings. But the public didn't buy it. Nor did the mayor. Nor did the school board, which convened an emergency session and for the first time in its history, voted unanimously to implement a new code, the Equity and Accountability Mandate. Jasmine Reed watched it all unfold, not with glee, but with a sense of weary affirmation. She hadn't wanted this. She hadn't asked for it, but now that it had begun, she wasn't backing down. One afternoon, as she packed up after algebra, her teacher, Mr. Lionel Barrett, a quiet man with graying temples, paused at her desk. "You changed something," he said gently. "And not just here, in me." Jasmine Reed blinked, surprised. He continued, "I've taught for 23 years. I've seen a lot. But I didn't speak up when I should have. And I want you to know I see you now." That night, Jasmine Reed and Imani Reed sat on their porch in Grant Park, watching dusk settle over the pecan trees. "Did I do the right thing?" Jasmine Reed asked. Mia didn't answer right away. She looked at her daughter, at the strength in her jaw, the way her shoulders no longer curled inward, the subtle power of her silence. "You did something brave," Imani Reed said finally. "You stood still while the world tried to shove you down. That's not just right. That's extraordinary." Later that week, an invitation arrived. The Georgia Youth Leadership Summit asked Jasmine Reed to speak. She hesitated, unsure if she was ready to hold a microphone and talk about pain with strangers, but she agreed. On stage under bright lights, she stood with both hands gripping the sides of a lectern. Her head was still bare, the hair growing in uneven patches, soft and strong. "They tried to make me feel less than human," she began, voice steady. "They thought if they stripped away what made me proud, I'd be quiet. But they didn't take my voice. They didn't take my mind. And they didn't take my mother's spirit which lives in me." The applause wasn't thunderous. It was deep, resonant, people clapping with tears in their eyes and fire in their chests. When she stepped down, 3 girls her age waited in line just to hug her. One whispered, "They did the same to me, but you showed me what to do next." That moment stayed with Jasmine Reed more than any headline or article. The next morning, she went back to school like usual. But the world didn't feel usual anymore. Her presence had changed the landscape, not just of the school, but of the community, the city, and perhaps even the way one generation would think about justice, dignity, and silence. 3 weeks later, the air in Atlanta had shifted. Not just the weather, which now carried the first hints of southern autumn with its dry breeze and scattered golden leaves, but something deeper. It was in the way teachers paused before speaking, in the way students thought twice before whispering cruelty behind someone's back, in the way parents asked harder questions at PTA meetings. The shift had a name now, the Jasmine Reed effect. Newspapers picked it up, not as a gimmick, but as shorthand for the ripple that began in one school bathroom and ended up reaching City Hall, school districts, and living rooms across the state. Jasmine Reed let it change her routine. She still woke up early, still tied her shoes the same way, still walked to the bus with her headphones in and her mind somewhere between homework and daydreams. But she noticed things. The girl who used to avoid eye contact now said hi. The boy who laughed too loudly at cruel jokes now carried himself quieter, less sure of the wrong things. The principal, Mr. Rainey, had started visiting classrooms again, not with a clipboard, but with real questions. People were trying, and maybe that was enough for now. One afternoon in late October, Jasmine Reed sat with her mother at a local cafe in the old Fourth Ward, sipping cider and listening to the hum of voices around them. Across the table, Imani Reed's phone buzzed with texts from city council members and media liaison, but she ignored them for a moment. "There's something you should see," she said, and slid a manila folder across the table. Jasmine Reed opened it. Inside were letters, dozens of them. Some typed, some written in looping cursive, some with drawings attached. They were from students around Georgia, and some from as far as Illinois and Texas, who had seen her speech, read the articles, watched the video, and felt something shift. One read, "I'm 12 and wear my hair natural, too. I used to wish it was straight, but now I wear it proud." Another, "My brother was bullied for stuttering. I never stood up for him. I'm going to start now." Jasmine Reed read each letter slowly like they were sacred. They didn't all say the same thing, but they all carried the same message. "Because of you, I see myself differently." She closed the folder, held it to her chest, and smiled. Not wide or proud, but small, grounded. The kind of smile that comes from being deeply seen. That weekend, she returned to Millbrook High for the Fall Cultural Festival. It had been on the calendar long before the incident, but now it felt like a different kind of celebration. Student-led booths lined the gymnasium. Music poured from speakers. There were food stalls serving everything from Jamaican patties to Greek spanakopita. But at the far end of the gym, just beside the table with the poetry readings, was a new addition, a long whiteboard with the words, "Voices Matter," stenciled in bold at the top. Beneath it, students wrote their stories, their promises, their apologies. Jasmine Reed walked slowly past it, eyes scanning the messages. "I used to laugh when others got hurt. I won't anymore. I never knew how strong someone could be until I watched her walk down the hallway like a warrior. I'm sorry, Nia." She didn't know who wrote that last one. It didn't matter. What mattered was that it was written. A few feet away, her former English teacher, Ms. Eliza Thornton, stood wiping her eyes with the corner of her scarf. "This school feels different now," she said, her voice soft. "Not perfect, but honest." Later that night, as the gym emptied and cleanup began, a small ceremony took place in the library. The principal, the school board, and a few local officials had gathered, not for press, not for photos, but to formally recognize Jasmine Reed with the inaugural Courage in Community Award. It wasn't flashy, just a small plaque, a few heartfelt speeches, and a standing ovation from the people who had once overlooked her. As she stepped up to the podium, Jasmine Reed glanced at the librarian who had saved a copy of her favorite book just for her, at the janitor who always greeted her with a nod, and at the school nurse who once offered her a quiet place to cry. They weren't strangers anymore. They were witnesses. She spoke only a few words. "Thank you for listening. Thank you for changing." And then she stepped down. Not because she had nothing left to say, but because sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do is stand in their truth and let the silence speak for them. Weeks turned to months. Life moved forward. News cycles shifted. Other stories rose. But the Monroe Education Reform Bill, named in honor of Mayor Imani Reed's family, passed through state legislation with bipartisan support. It mandated implicit bias training, a standardized response to bullying and assault, and gave students a voice in school governance. In classrooms across Georgia, students watched old videos of Nia's speech during civic lessons. Some teachers cried, some paused mid-lesson, caught off guard by the rawness of her story. At Millbrook, the Voices Matter wall became permanent, repainted, respected, updated weekly. And Nia, she grew her hair out slowly, letting the coils return on their own time. Some days she wore it out, some days she kept it short, but she never hid it. She never hid again. On the anniversary of the incident, she returned to the auditorium, not as a victim, not even as a student, but as a keynote speaker at the Georgia Youth Policy Summit. The room was packed, lights dimmed. She stepped to the mic, taller than the year before, not just in height, but in gravity. "I used to think silence was safety, but I've learned that speaking up, even with a trembling voice, is how you change the world." She looked out over a sea of young faces, hopeful and wide-eyed. "And if you ever feel like no one sees you, I do. I see you." Afterward, as she left the building, A girl about 11 years old with thick glasses and a nervous smile ran up and hugged her without a word. Jasmine Reed hugged her back. No questions asked. That evening at home, she and Imani Reed sat quietly on their front porch again. The Psychas had just begun to sing. Imani Reed handed her a letter. This one official. The White House had extended an invitation. Jasmine Reed was to be honored with the President's Youth Medal for social courage. Jasmine Reed didn't cry. She didn't beam. She simply looked at her mother and said, "Okay, let's keep going." That's how change works. Not in one grand moment, but in the choosing every day to walk through doors that once slammed shut, to speak in rooms that once fell quiet, to stand imperfect, vulnerable, unyielding, and say, "I belong here too." And she did. She always had. Now the world knew it. Jasmine Reed didn't set out to change a school, a city, or a system. She just wanted to survive. But through quiet courage and unwavering truth, she did more than survive. She sparked a ripple of reckoning. A reminder that silence doesn't mean weakness, and being soft-spoken doesn't mean you can't be heard. In a world that often punishes difference, she chose to stand in her truth. And that truth echoed far beyond the walls of her school. If this story moved you, take a moment to like this video, drop a comment, and subscribe to Soulful Stories V, where every voice matters and every story speaks to the soul. Now we want to hear from you. Should the girls who bullied Jasmine be allowed back in school? Do you believe the school staff failed their duty, or were they just overwhelmed? And most importantly, how do you define real strength? Let's open up the conversation below. We're listening. And as always, stay strong, stay soulful.